So with the hype of Nero dropping over here on the JP version of the game, do not forget that there is a new 4-star servant also on her banner going on right up as well. And this servant, Locusta, is actually really fun to use. She kind of functions as, say, the poison version of Van Gogh, but obviously not as OP, but kind of has a very similar style of gameplay where they get a lot of value off of poisoning themselves and poisoning the enemy. So it makes for some very interesting gameplay. And as I've kind of been playing around with her a little bit, I can say that she is kind of just standard .jpeg good unit aside from that niche. I mean, the niche is interesting and it's going to be good, but I think they played it really safe by putting just a decent 4-star on right up with Draco over there, because they don't want to have Nero right there and then you just are getting really mad that you keep pulling this like Dookie Dogwater 4-star. Instead, if you pull a lot of copies of this 4-star, you'll probably get some value out of her. The only unfortunate thing is that she is a single target art servant on right up with another single target art servant that happens to be like one of the best servants in the game. So I don't know how often you're going to use Locusta if you do manage to pull Draco or Beast Nero, but hey, if you don't pull her, she is pretty decent. But before we start diving into this servant and talking about all of her stats and skills, if you have not already, make sure you leave a like on the video and you subscribe to the channel for that sweet daily FGO content, where your boy is always going to make sure that you are informed on the goings-ons on both versions of the game. Also, if you want to see me play FGO live, I do that every weekday starting at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on my Twitch, which is linked down in the description down below. But without further ado, let's go ahead and just start getting into her kit, starting off with her hits, which are kind of interesting because she's basically got a caster deck as an assassin. I assume that's because in lore or whatever, maybe they are kind of like a castery type person. I understand that they're like one of the poisoner people from history from Roman times, but they also seem to have some like alchemic stuff going on. So maybe the fact that she's got a triple arts deck is a reference to the fact that they could also maybe be a caster or something. I just think that's really cool. What it does help her do though as an art servant is it really does help her find her arts cards to ensure that she is always spamming her NP, which is going to help her spread additional poison and do even more damage, because Locusta has a really easy time getting to like 4 stacks of poison on the enemy, but when you can start getting to like 5+, that's when you start seeing like really insane damage. Not that the 4 stack is bad, but you get what I'm saying. When you could really start pushing past that, you start to do really insane levels of damage, and having a triple arts deck is going to be pretty nice for that, because you're going to find your arts brave chains very often, and you're going to need to be doing that because 0.47% NP gain ain't the best. You're going to be a little reliant on getting some crits, but unfortunately, while she is an assassin with really high natural star gen, the fact that she does have a triple arts deck does mean that she only has 1 quick card, and I do not think it's going to be enough when it comes to providing stars for just not only herself but the entire party. So you might want to equip like a 20-30 or something if you're planning on doing any crits, if that's something you would like to do with Locusta, even though she doesn't really have the kit for it, I suppose. But yeah, she's kind of got some interesting stuff going on when it comes to the hits, but the skills are far and away much more interesting because she's kind of a gimmick servant. So let's kind of start getting into some of her gimmicks. Starting off with skill 1, this kicks off her gimmick as a poison servant by hitting all enemies with a 5-turn poison on a 6-turn cooldown, meaning that the poison will always generally be up, and then she's going to go ahead and give herself just some generic good stuff for being an art servant, a 30% arts buff for 3 turns, and 20% NP gain for 3 turns as well. So these should both help out her arts cards a lot, which she has 4 technically, because if you count her NP, that's an additional arts card that she's got going. With both of these skills, it shouldn't really matter that she can't provide a whole lot of crit stars and do crits on those arts cards. It should more along the lines be, you're finding your arts chains, and because her arts cards are getting buffed, which is increasing the NP gain of the arts cards, and then the raw NP gain is further increasing that, you should be fine when it comes to the NP gaining department, right? Again, arts brave chains are going to be very strong, and this is going to make your arts cards at the bare minimum serviceable to firing her NP, because again, you want to lay as much poison as possible on the enemy. But this one right here is just kind of the one that gets her started. You generally want to fire the skill whenever it's available. More poison, just generic good buffs for an art servant, a very, very strong start. The second skill is where you start to see some interesting stuff come in. Now, firstly, this does function as her survivability skill, which is nice, right? Although Castoria does give you a lot of survivability already, it's nice that she has like decreased damage taken and a guts. It's different forms of survivability, so she's kind of splitting herself off so she can do a lot of good things, especially when paired with Castoria. It should mean that she should stick around in some of these fights and can take some pretty decent hits for the 3 turns that the damage taken is up. But the final effect here is actually really interesting because, spoiler alert, she has 2 different ways to actually poison herself. One is from her 3rd skill and the other is from her Bond CE. And whenever she gets poisoned, she converts the poison damage into health, which is very interesting because I always talk about how the double Castoria setup is really good. You have a lot of survivability, but you don't have a lot of sustainability, right? You're not really getting your HP back. Once you lose it, generally without like command codes or the DPS servant that the double Castorias are buffing, you don't really have a way to get that lost HP back. This is very nice because while it's not going to help your other double Castorias, it will actually keep her alive because she'll be naturally very tanky because of the decreased damage taken. And she'll get some pretty nice healing, especially if you can get her Bond CE, which I guess I'll just reference right now. This just starts her off with 500 poison while on the field, and while the 500 heal doesn't sound like a whole lot, when combined with some of her other skills, namely skill 3, you'll be getting some decent recovery back. Plus, who doesn't love free extra damage against poison enemies? It's like the last thing she needs. It's actually one of the few Bond CEs that I'm like, they did very, very well on this one. Because a poison special damage mod is like the only thing she's really lacking, and they're like, you know what, let's just give her one of those, right? Like, let's just slap that on her Bond CE. Absolutely loved it, right? But I guess since I mentioned that 3rd skill, let's go ahead and just start diving into that over here. As you can see, I'm going to kind of skip to the 2nd effect of this skill right here. She's able to give herself an on-attack buff that allows her to slap poison on somebody for 3 attacks for 3 turns, so basically 3 free stacks of poison on top of the 1st skill, which is why I said she has a very easy time getting 4 stacks on people. And then when you start firing the NP, that's when you can start getting like stack number 5, number 6, number 7, and really start ramping up her damage. And then over here, you can also see that she's going to inflict herself with 1000 poison damage for 5 turns, basically meaning that at bare minimum, she's got a 1k heal every single turn because that effect to convert poison damage into HP also lasts for 5 turns. Very well designed, right? They're not leaving you with any holes in your strategy here. But if you have the Bond CE, you can also get up to like 1500 every single turn, which is pretty nice, especially when given how tanky she's going to be. And then just as a nice little added bonus effect, she charges the entire party's NP gauge by 20%, which is very nice because a lot of the art supports have very strong NPs. Tamamo, Lady Avalon, and Castoria all have very powerful NPs that do a lot for the entire party, and so her being able to not only charge her own NP in case she's lacking a little bit even after the 1st skill, you can charge the other guy's NPs, which will help you get to your NP, especially in the case of Tamamo and Lady Avalon. In Castoria's case, it can help you out with debuff cleansing, which might be a little bit counterintuitive because you kind of do want to be poisoned, but maybe you also got stunned or something and you kind of have to get the debuff cleanse, or you just need the massive attack buff from Castoria's NP, or you just need some solemn defense. Again, just good all around because all of the art supports have very strong NPs. Speaking of NPs and them being very strong, looking at Locusta's NP, you'll see that she goes ahead and smacks the enemy with an immediate poison debuff, which is very nice because that's going to help out the special damage from her NP. That gives her bonus damage depending on the amount of stacks of poison that are on the enemy. So at bare minimum, have 4 stacks if you're going to go ahead and like use your face cards before firing your NP. Very similar to like, say, how Hokusai's gameplay can work, where maybe you want to attack before firing the NP to get that extra damage. You can also do that very similarly with Locusta over here, and so you can do all that to get extra damage, and then you also smack them with Toxic for 5 turns, so you might actually get some extra chip damage as well because it's going to buff how strong your poison is against the enemy. And then if all that wasn't enough, because she's really dipping into how much she loves poison, she also gives herself a 10 to 30% arts buff whenever she fires. That also procs first, so realistically, that 1st skill is actually like a 40% arts buff whenever you fire the NP. So again, that's also really nice. She can do some pretty decent damage. I should be showing the NP damage chart, or I should have already shown it. And so she could be very nice if you don't have like a single target art servant. Maybe you did not pull Draco. She can be very, very good for those scenarios. The only things that I'm hoping that she might get in the future, which I know is very ironic to talk about a servant that just came out maybe getting a buff in the future, but maybe even something like her own attack buff or maybe like an NP damage buff, just to kind of diversify her buffs out a little bit, because one weakness of this servant is that if you're going up against a boss that can't be debuffed, she is losing a lot of her damage, because if they can't be debuffed, or they can't specifically be poisoned, which there are a couple of bosses that you can't do residual damage to, like they're immune to burn, curse, poison, that good stuff, you kind of shut down a lot of what she's able to do. So I would say that she's like a very solid servant, with the caveat that you're not fighting people that are debuff immune, because then that kind of shuts down her entire style of gameplay. But let me know what you guys think about Locusta in the comments down below. I went ahead and caught myself NP2 for this servant, so I'm pretty happy about that. But I'd love to hear what the community thinks about this, because I know when they were announced for the live stream, which I was reacting to live on my Twitch, if you were there, you were there, and you know that when she popped up, we were all super like weirded out, like, who the heck is this random servant? But kind of makes sense with, like, again, the whole like Roman poisoner thing, so I get why they did it, but it was the most random thing. But I can at least say that I'm happy with the gimmick they did. It's a very interesting servant, and I don't think the gimmick is like only interesting. I think it's also kind of good. So I like my gimmicks like that, when they actually give somebody something interesting and it turns out to not just be complete dookie dog water. But with all that being said, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. You guys have yourselves a nice day, and I will catch you guys in the next video. Peace, late guys.